Set?
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for coming. This is another semester of the Institute on Ecosystems Rough Cut seminar series. I'm Bruce Maxwell. I'm the MSU director of the Institute on Ecosystems. And this semester, Madison Boone is, I want to introduce, is organizing this event. And so she's going to be introducing our speakers. So with that, I'll just let Madison take over.
Hi, everyone. I'm Madison Boone. I'm the program manager for the Institute on Ecosystems. Thank you all for joining us today for our first Rough Cut seminar of this fall 2019 semester. It's very exciting. And today we have with us Ann Carlson, who's from the Wilderness Society. So I'll go ahead and share a little bit more information about Ann. She is the Senior Climate Adaptation Specialist with the Wilderness Society, where she seeks to build resilience to the impacts of our changing climate in partnership with Montana's tribal communities, religious leaders, agency staff, conservation partners, regional scientists, and the general public, all based on the best available science at the scale of entire landscapes. Prior to joining the Wilderness Society in 2009, Ann spent 15 years developing research and conservation projects on numerous carnivore, elephant, primate, and antelope species across sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia with her colleagues at Cambridge University and the San Diego Zoo. She's a Fulbright scholar and earned her master's and PhD degrees from the University of Wisconsin-Madison in 1995 and 2000, respectively. So we'll go ahead and give a warm welcome to Ann presenting today. And so just a few pointers. This is your microphone, and then you can use that to advance.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you,
For
Madison.
people online, make sure to mute your microphones as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Madison, and thank you, Bruce, for the kind invitation to be here today. Thank all of you for coming and making time in your busy day. I'm looking forward to the discussion part of the talk especially, so I'll try to get to that as quickly as possible. But right, so this is a brand new talk. I've never talked about this work before, and I'm super excited to see some of my partners in the faith community here today, and I can't wait to hear their perspectives and their input into anything I missed, because there's been so much going on in the past couple of years. I'm looking forward to that as well. So I thought I'd start out by sharing the fact that I've now been at the Wilderness Society for 10 years, and I just celebrated my anniversary a couple months ago. I'm kind of shocked, actually, to have that creep up on me so quickly. This is my first and only permanent job of my life. I was a late bloomer, and I am amazed that I'm suddenly 10 years deep in the work. So I've been spending a little time reflecting about that and thinking about the program when and the position when I started it 10 years ago. Back then in 2009, not many conservation NGOs had climate change staff or programs. It was a time when a lot of people were trying to figure out how a global new environmental stressor touched down here in Montana and in their conservation organization, given their focus and their mission and their work. And then they had to try to figure out what their vision might be to respond to that, and then find funders who were willing to support the development of new programs. And so it was this very interesting time. We didn't really have a template for what to do. And so when I started, there were a couple of really big questions that will probably be familiar to everyone in the room. If you're going to think about climate change, there's a couple of big questions you're going to have to grapple with. One is, at what spatial scale should I be working? Right? It's a global threat. I can't work at the scale of the entire planet, nor should I be. My organization has always been focused on work within the continental and United States, and up in Alaska, actually. So they wanted me to focus in the Northern Rockies, and that sounded like a good idea to me. But you also have to try to think about where you think you might be able to have an impact and really work effectively. And so if I said I'm going to work at the scale of my backyard, I could probably hit it out of the park, but it wouldn't really do anything to address the problem itself. So happily, my organization has also been very heavily focused on landscapes. And the Crown of the Continent was a huge focus for many, many years before I joined their staff. So I knew that thinking about the Northern Rockies was really important, and supporting people with capacity in science was a way that I should be going with the program. And then I knew that I was going to be spending a lot of time in the Crown of the Continent landscape. That brought up the even more interesting question, which is, with whom should I be partnering? With whom should I be collaborating? And everybody makes choices about this all the time. And I don't know if we usually talk about how we make those kinds of choices. And so that's what I really want to focus on a little bit today, which is really thinking about how do we, especially scientists who try to be very objective, make decisions about who we're going to partner with and collaborate with, and what influences those decisions. Okay. So the bio that Madison just kindly read is very formal, right? As scientists, you often have these super formal, very objective sounding biographies that you share about yourself. It's like, here's what I did, these are my degrees, these are the places I worked, these are the species I worked on. But that leaves so much out about who you are and why you've made some of the choices you have about who you collaborate with. And I feel like a lot of that is influenced by maybe your upbringing, your experiences in life, and I'd love to see scientists talk about that more, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit right now before I dive into the meat of the talk. So these are the species, many of which I've worked on. There's more, but these are the ones that I spent most of my time on. I've been incredibly lucky. But the thing that's left out of this kind of a slide, which is pretty standard for a scientific talk, is the people. Right, so I spent, anywhere I've lived and worked around the world, I've spent a huge amount of my time, very happily, working with lots of people. So in a wide variety of capacities. So in the upper left, you can see that's my husband, Ron. We developed educational outreach programs for kids from 7 public schools in the capital of Zambia, Lusaka, when we lived and worked there on large carnivores. And so the kids used to come out and we used to do all these, we used to teach them how to do everything that we could do. And they were great at it, actually. They could have replaced us at any time. But he's teaching them here how to use a radio collar and how to track it. In the bottom left, you can see me doing human-wildlife conflict interviews. I used to do these in villages around the 15,000 square mile national park, where we were studying large carnivores to try and understand which carnivores were really problematic for these communities and which ones they liked. And on the lower right, you can see I'm way in the back wearing a blue shirt, doing the same kind of work around human-wildlife conflict and trying to understand the ways in which Asian elephants were impacting local communities in Sri Lanka, because the impacts there were very significant. And then, of course, you just have friends in the communities like Mandacin Kalembe and Farron Kibanda in the upper right. And so you spend so much time with people, and one of the things that really was apparent to me all those years was the degree to which faith and religion played a very fundamental role in the lives of most people around the planet every single day. And in so many different ways, it was quite astonishing to witness. And so when I say faith, I mean Christian, Muslim. Sri Lanka has been a Buddhist country for millennia, so Buddhism there, sometimes animist. And it really was a very pivotal and fundamental part of people's lives. In Sri Lanka, I worked there during the Civil War in 2006 and 2007 and discovered that a lot of the Buddhist monks were providing people in the conflict zones with food and shelter. So it was something that I spent a lot of time thinking about while I was working abroad. And but the role that they played wasn't surprising to me because of my own upbringing. My dad, you can see him here on the upper left, he designs and builds pipe organs for churches. And so he's been doing that for over 60 years. And I thought that was normal until I was about 18, and I realized nobody else's dad had that job. And then my eldest of 3 brothers is on the bottom right, and he's worked with my dad all that time. And so I grew up in all different kinds of churches. That was normal for me. So it could be Christian Science or Polish Catholic, Baptist or Lutheran, Methodist, Christian Scientists, etc., Jehovah's Witnesses. So that was really normal for me. And then my parents sent me to a day school that was at a convent when I was in 7th grade, and I went there until I graduated high school. And it was also a retirement home for Sisters of the Sacred Heart. And so there were lots and lots and lots of nuns there who had retired. So this was very normal for me. And so when I started working for the Wilderness Society, I said, why aren't we working with faith leaders and members of faith communities? And everyone said, well, we haven't done that yet, and we're not really sure who to talk to. And I couldn't quite figure it out for a while either, until I had the great fortune to meet Sue Higgins, who at that point worked for the Center for Large Landscape Conservation, and now she works here at MSU. But Sue was really thinking along the same lines and had also worked with faith communities around the world in places like Bhutan and Mongolia, as well as in the States. And she also felt like there was this huge overlap of values with faith leaders really caring deeply about earth care and care of creation, and really having a lot of similar kinds of things that they cared about. And so she said, I'm going to figure out how to do this. And she went and got some funding for a grant that would allow us to have an initial conversation to try to think about, are there ways that we could move forward together? Where would those, what would that be? And how would we, and who would we like to work with? And so we had our very first workshop to try and do this in 2016. And so I'll tell you very briefly about how that initial conversation went, and then I'll talk about what we've been doing together the last year and a half. And then everyone's going to wonder what they've been doing with their time, because I have never seen partners do so much in so little space of time. It's absolutely dazzling. But the first thing that we did was get together at Flathead Lake Lutheran Bible Camp and do that for a couple days and really start thinking about climate change and where we might have similar kinds of goals or things that we cared about. Virtually every religious affinity has published a statement on climate change and the need to address stewardship of creation, as well as the great importance of social justice issues. So those among us who are the poorest and most impacted by climate change are the ones who are contributing least to the problem. And so that was actually a huge part of the conversations that we were having. And so we agreed by the end of the 2 days together that we should really think about how to advance our dialogue with one another and to think about some sort of actions that we could take together to address climate change around shared values and goals. My role in this was to try to provide information in a way that would help support whatever the priorities were for faith leaders, and because they were very deeply interested in having information-based discussions around climate change, its causes and impacts. In particular, they really cared a lot about water and wildfire, but they also wanted to know what kinds of solutions communities were using right here in Montana. And so that was also something I spent time on. But in thinking about information that was helpful, I put this in here for you, Connie. One of the things I talked about back then was the fact that, you know, people in Montana always say, what does an average temperature change of 2 degrees per year mean? Anyway, it sounds pretty good. We have really wicked winters here. And so I shared this particular graph with everyone just to show people, well, if you take the average temperature on any given day and you plot it on a graph, and so the number of times that it happens per year is on this axis, and then it will tell you how cold or hot or how much, I know, is it sort of in the middle on the axis on the bottom. It's like, what does that really mean if it shifts 2 degrees? And so what you can see is, of course, we're going to have maybe a couple days a year where you have unbelievably cold temperatures. Maybe it's, you know, minus 40. And then you'll have a couple days that are going to be more like today, or maybe they'll be even in the hundreds. Most of the days are going to be with an average in the 50s, and that's where you see this big bell curve in the middle. But if the average of all of those shifts to the right by 2 degrees, suddenly you have massive amounts of biological change, because change occurs at the edges of this curve. Suddenly you're losing lots of your extreme cold weather, and that's where you see bark beetles not being killed in the wintertime anymore, and them surviving, and you really see these much larger than usual outbreaks of insects in our forests. And then on the right side, you can see that we have way more hot weather than we have had historically in the last century. And you also see we're going to have more record hot weather. And that's where you start to see way more frequent or larger, more severe wildfires. And so that's what that means. And so the feedback was that this kind of information could be really helpful. And so we started to walk together forward on a path to think about what we could do next. And that took us a little while. And then once we got to 2018, that's what I'll start to talk about next. We had really formed our own coalition that was focused on faith leaders, scientists, and climate action, and really thinking about where we wanted to spend our time and energy, and then what sorts of information would be helpful to support that. Okay, so starting in April of 2018 was a workshop up in Missoula. It was co-organized by the Faith and Climate Action Montana group. 25 people participated. Started off with a movie screening and a panel discussion about climate change and its impacts. And there was a keynote by a faith-based environmental leader, and he really talked about how all of the major religions in the world long ago, over a decade, have really come out with statements on climate change and the urgent need to address it and what that really means. We also had a communications training by Ben Long that we supported at the Wilderness Society, essentially again in response to faith leaders' request for training. How do we talk to members of the press or decision makers, members of our congressional delegation or the Montana State Legislature? How do we talk to TV journalists or write op-eds? Because we feel like our voice is missing from this conversation here and nationally, and we feel like some trainings would help us do that more effectively. And so that was part of the workshop. Next came a brand new website. I think it's a kind of gorgeous one, honestly, because we decided to have a big statewide conference on faith, science, and climate action that would be based here at MSU in October of 2018. And so, and Connie, and I'll introduce her in a little bit, as well as all the members of the steering committee, spent a huge amount of time really thinking about what this website could look like, how it could be used as a toolkit so that people could have information and resources available to them, and then how this could help also drive participation in this conference. Lots and lots of op-eds all over the state, more than I can count at this point. I'm thinking in the last year and a half, there have been at least 15, it may be as many as 20. And so here's the Reverend Jody McDevitt. She's started off by asking the question, can science and faith collaborate? And really talking about how absolutely science and faith need one another when it comes to caring for the earth, and how science contributes research and analysis and solutions, and faith contributes a moral foundation and hope. And so these are the kinds of conversations that I think have really been missing nationally and regionally, and we felt like there was a lot of power in having scientists and faith leaders work on these op-eds together. And so these were to help people see that there were these opportunities to engage in these conversations and learnings in the state conference, for example, or to take action on their own in a variety of ways. And then we had the conference here in 2018. There were 250 people about that that participated. It started with Dr. Catherine Hayhoe, who is an IPCC national scientist for our country, who participates in all of that work and reports very intensively. She's also a Christian evangelical, and so she's able to really talk about both of these things coming together in a way that was really powerful. And she also has a huge number of short videos that are available to help people in their work to address climate change on her website about global weirding, and those are really great. I'm super happy that Bruce Maxwell was able to be the person who delivered the science. Very fortuitously, MSU had decided to embark on this very, very impressive and timely project to do an assessment of how climate change was impacting the state of Montana. And doing that in a way, again, thinking about with whom you should partner or engage, going all over the state to ask people, we're inviting all of you into this conversation. What are the topics that you would like to hear us address the most, that you would like more information about? And those included for the first iteration, let's see, there was water, agriculture, and forests. And then delivering that information back to communities. So I thought that was an incredibly great process. It had just come out, and so we were really thrilled to welcome Bruce to the stage. You can see him in the lower right picture, to really explain to people exactly what they wanted to know about and then to answer questions. We then had breakout sessions to talk about various topics that people might want to hear about. All of them were videotaped and are available on the website. They included talking about human health issues, repeating the communications training, really thinking about the greening of church infrastructure by putting solar panels on buildings, on church properties, how climate might impact food security, and then thinking about how you motivate congregations to achieve change. Immediately afterward, a lot of engagement with regional and national decision makers started in earnest, starting with a letter to Montana's entire congressional delegation asking them to address climate change. It says here on the bottom left, we're asking you to please raise the level of public discourse about climate change, its threats, and its opportunities. Please form bipartisan coalitions to develop science-based solutions and public policy. And also talking about the need for economic transformation that will really improve everyone's health and well-being. I couldn't possibly imagine coming up with a better message. And then really engaging quite a lot with the Montana State Legislature around the need for clean energy legislation and a direction for the state that would shift toward that over time. I love this picture. It makes me really happy. There was a workshop that was later held then at St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church in Billings that talked about the costs and the feasibility of installing solar panels on church rooftops, and it was attended by people from 10 different churches. Will Wright, who's a graduate student here at MSU, was awarded a $30,000 grant that will allow the installation of solar panels on top of the Catholic Church on campus. And then Angela's Piazza, which is a women's shelter run by the Ursuline Sisters in Billings, and St. James Episcopal Church have also installed solar panels recently. There's also participation in national climate change litigation. So Will Wright also, I don't know how he does it, he's so busy, but he's one of the main authors of an amicus brief in the case of Juliana versus the United States. And that's where 21 children are collectively suing the federal government. You can see pictures of them here talking about how our future is a constitutional right and how they are trying to force the executive branch into making decisions that will stabilize the climate and really address climate change. Dr. Lori Byron and her husband, Dr. Rob Byron, have also been incredibly active in more ways than I could probably even get into here. They're engaging with the Institute on Ecosystems for their upcoming chapter on the impacts of climate change on human health here in Montana. They are also working to connect the dots between climate impacts and human health in a number of other ways. She recently did you guys have to help me. How do you say those words? I always mispronounce them. Thank you, right. So she recently did a talk on that to really connect those dots for members of the Bozeman community. And then she's helped found a new group, Montana Health Professionals for a Healthy Climate. And it really is trying to help people understand what that looks like in Montana right now today, and then what the solutions to that might be. All right, so I'm just going to talk very briefly about next steps for the Montana Faith and Environment Coalition, and then I'll open it up for discussion and particularly be interested in hearing from some of my partners here. But the first thing is establishing a Montana state chapter of Interfaith Power and Light. So Interfaith Power and Light was founded by the Reverend Canon Sally Grover Bingham years ago. She's an Episcopal priest and a canon for the environment in the Diocese of California. She was one of the first faith leaders who fully recognized that climate change was an incredibly important and urgent moral issue. IPL works together with other members of faith communities to really find ways to collectively address climate change and to call for decision makers to really address the crisis immediately. It currently has 20,000 congregation members in 40 states, and I'm really proud to say that Montana will now be the 41st chapter in the union of IPL. In addition to doing that, our coalition has decided to become a 501c3 organization officially, and this will really help with, how do you funnel grant money, and how do we, we've had umbrella organizations to do that, but this will really be enormously helpful in thinking about how you fund this and move forward in ways that are really sustainable over the long term. They're also getting training on lobbying for nonprofit organizations, given their engagement with the members of our congressional delegation and the Montana State Legislature. We all felt it was really important to have real clarity on what you can do and what we cannot do as a 501c3, and so that's something that will be coming up. As well as continuing to write grants collaboratively to fund this work going forward, and that's something that we have done since the very beginning, and we continue to do that. One of the major grants that really funded the kickoff of this in 2018 was through the Episcopal Church, and that was really a fantastic grant opportunity that I never would have known existed, and so we keep trying to think about how we cobble this kind of funding together. There's going to be the second annual Montana Faith and Science and Climate Action Conference here at MSU in 2020. And we're really excited about that. The first one was, you never really know if you decide to have a state conference, if anyone is going to come. So to have the first one be so successful was incredibly exciting. And at the very end, on the last day, during the question and answer and discussion session about where should we go forward as a group, someone stood up and said, I'd just like us all to take a moment here and think about the fact that this is a historic event. We've never had faith leaders and scientists coming together to address climate change across the entire state of Montana before. So that was pretty wonderful. And so we're in the middle of trying to figure out how this is going to play out, what we would like to focus on. We really feel like food security and impacts to public health are going to be incredibly important. And at that point, we will also have the Institute on Ecosystems' new assessment on public health, which will be enormously important. Okay, so lessons learned. So again, kind of to go back and reflect now that I've been engaged in this work for 10 years and really thinking about what we have been doing together for the last 4 years. What have we been learning? One of the things that I think it's helpful to think about is, what's your role or what's my role as we try to think about something that's this overwhelming but incredibly important and increasingly becoming a crisis for everyone on the planet. So my role in this particular partnership and in others around climate change focuses a lot on developing and delivering the best available science to my partners. And so it doesn't matter if I'm working with state or federal or provincial agency staff, or if I'm working with members of tribes and First Nations, or if I'm just working with individual communities across Montana, or if I'm working with faith leaders. It's really thinking about and spending a lot of time listening deeply to understand what kinds of information are they most interested in, what topics, how would they like it delivered to them, making sure that it's not completely filled with acronyms or technical jargon, just to really help make sure that everyone is getting exactly what they need to move forward. There's also just capacity and time around organizing or expertise in areas that I may have picked up along the way. So for example, co-organizing conferences and workshops takes an awful lot of time. And so really thinking about how I have time to pitch in with that effort is something that I can definitely do. And then I already mentioned joint fundraising. There's also connecting the dots between partnerships. So because I have partners across the state and the region now, I'm able to move between them and think about who's working on what and where they may benefit from either having conversations with one another or where there may be really exciting new science that's being developed that can answer the questions and needs of another partnership, or perhaps inviting people to participate in events that other groups are planning. Or making them aware of the progress, like I'm trying to do today. Another one is sharing case studies in climate work at conferences and through panel presentations and so on. So I do these kinds of talks as well at regional and national levels. Sometimes it might be that the head of the Forest Service comes out for a review of Region 1, for example, and they'd like to hear from partners about what's working and what isn't. And so really trying to highlight what case studies are really the most exciting, or what a new step might be that could has the potential to make a profound impact. Another thing is to really think about how you help others at national conferences, whether they're conservation practitioners or managers, to really think about embarking on different kinds of conversations with a much more diverse group of people. And then, what was the other thing I was going to say here? I'll think of it in a second. But just to circle back where I started, I think taking a step back to more objectively think about with whom you partner and why is time well spent. And we've been doing that more in our offices across the Wilderness Society. We have 150 staff in 14 offices. So even though we're a national organization, we're not huge. And so we have to be really strategic and careful about what we focus on, the kind of work we take on. A lot of the projects we take on are often 20 or 30-year projects. So you may work on them for a big part of your career and never see them to fruition. Climate change is absolutely going to fall into that category. But it's also really thinking about who's here, and why don't we take a step back and reevaluate that and think about with whom we're working. And so one of the things that we've just been doing this year in the Bozeman office is really just assembling all kinds of data on who lives in Montana. How many people are there? There's on average 7 people per square mile. We're very rural. We have a growing Latinx population. Where are they centered? Are we engaging with them? We aren't in our office. Who else is here that we may or may not be working with? We do work with tribes. We work with all kinds of rural communities, members of the ranching and farming communities, and then members of state, federal, provincial agencies, et cetera. And there's a long list there, but I really was amazed and interested to see the kinds of diversity that we have here where we have not been engaging. And so we'll be revisiting that and thinking about that again more intentionally. We have, for example, many of you may know this, but we have one of the highest percentages of veterans in the union. So there are an awful lot of military veterans here. I'm married to one, actually, so I shouldn't have been so surprised, but really thinking about, that I know that my husband spends a lot of time out and really cares about all the kinds of things that we're talking about here today, as someone who really enjoys quiet spaces and bow hunting in the backcountry. And so really going back to the drawing board and thinking about why we're working with some partners and maybe not with others, and where there may be some important new opportunities. And then the last thing I just wanted to say maybe is, it's important for me to remind myself, we've never been through human-caused climate change before. It's brand new. There's no blueprint for how to do this. And so for me, the amount of learning that's involved from being with my partners is extraordinary. And that's probably never been the case more than it has been with the Montana Faith and Environment Coalition. I am just dazzled by the amount of work they do, their creativity, their commitment. And these are all lessons that I really can take away and then think about how I might apply in other places. And so not all of them are here today, but some of them are. The Reverend Connie Campbell Pearson's here, and so is Pastor Valerie Webster. I saw Sue Higgins come in. I didn't get everyone's name on the list, but I'd love for them to just sort of raise their hand and just tell you, yeah, please raise your hands, even if I didn't put your, but it's just such thank you, such an inspiration. And I just put some of the members of the coalition on, who started very early on in 2016 and 2018, but obviously it has grown and is continuing to grow every single day. And so at the bottom, you can also see where you have other collaboratives and coalitions, for example, like the Montana Association of Christians and the Gallatin Interfaith Coalition, and who are really participating in this as well. And so I'm just going to stop now and thank you all for coming and for your attention and open it up for questions. And I'd love to hear from my partners about whatever I missed or got wrong. But thank you so much. Hi.
I have a question. I'm curious, the faith groups that you were working with, the folks, were they kind of already believers in climate change? I mean, you said a lot of these churches have already made statements on it. I'm just curious, were you crossing over to try to bring in the doubters at all? Or is it pretty much you're working with people who are already there?
And maybe I'll repeat it for folks on the phone. The question is whether or not everyone who is a faith partner already believes strongly in climate change, or if we were trying to also engage those who were doubters. And I'd actually like to open it up to all of you to say, because I don't want to speak for you. So go ahead, Valerie.
Can I interrupt for just a second?
Yeah.
I forgot to mention.
Oh.
Again, you have in front of you a microphone, and you can tap the bottom of it, and the little green light will come on. Then it's on, and the people online.
Thank you, Bruce.
Hi, this is the Reverend Valerie Webster. I'm an Episcopal priest, and I would say that as a both and. So the faith groups that were the most active in giving money and time and energy to this already recognize that care of creation is very important, and some are both scientists and people of faith, both at the same time. At the same time, we're also actively reaching out to everybody, including our brothers and sisters who come from a different point of view. And I'll just key on one thing. The word dominion in Genesis is understood by some as we can do anything to the earth we want, but there is a sizable group of people within and the three religions that come out of the Hebrew experience, so Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, who understand that term to mean we need to take care of the earth, that is a responsibility, that we are co-creators with God. It's on us to do our part and to learn and to be engaged. And so we're working at expanding that understanding with others.
Thank you. Did others want to say anything? Oh, please go ahead. Yep.
Yeah, I would say I would echo what Valerie said. One of the articles I had in the Bozeman Chronicle, in fact, talked about that Genesis part and about dominion and what it means. And that was an effort on my part as a minister and the new board president of the Montana chapter of Interfaith Power and Light to say to those who maybe have some doubts, no matter how this is being caused, we have responsibility to deal with this, because that's what it says in Genesis.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes.
Have you thought about young people and children? Groups that you should be reaching out to, like lost the old practice of what we're working on.
Yeah, and the question revolved, for those on the phone, around whether or not we've been engaging with youth and children and the practice of really thinking about the next generation and engaging them in these kinds of conversations moving forward. So again, I'll defer to my partners. Of course, the answer is yes.
Just talk about the solidarity on September 20th.
Yeah. So one of the things that, I didn't put that in there. That's a huge oversight. I'm so sorry. Thank you, Connie. Yeah, so on September 20th, there's going to be, as I think a lot of people know, there will be climate change marches around the world really demanding immediate action to address the climate change crisis. And so I can't believe I forgot to put that in. And so IPL here now in Montana has been really involved in that, and it's incredibly exciting, and that's something that really focuses on youth, and it's something that's been organized by youth. And I don't know if everyone's been, obviously we have an awful lot of news these days. It's very hard to keep up with it and do anything else at all during your day. But one of the things that's happened in the last several months that's been most heartening is to really see children and youth around the world saying this is incredibly important, and organizing marches, something like 1,000 cities around the globe recently, and it's astonishing. Oh, go right ahead. Go ahead, Val. Oh, hi.
My organization, we don't have a mic. But the brainchild of this strike, and we have flyers if anyone's interested. But we are youth run, and we've been working really hard to pull it off. So.
Yep. Yeah, and we're all inspired. We're so inspired, and so that's one of the things that's happened. Absolutely. Another thing I'll just maybe mention is that the state conference has purposely been organized to be family friendly, so that people can come. There are childcare; they can bring their kids, and so it's really trying to think about with whom you would like to engage and to make that possible. Would you like to add anything, Val?
Just that when we did the first one, we knew that we needed Melissa to have kids and youth involved, and we tried, but we didn't quite pull it off for the first one. But we are working hard on 2020, and I welcome anybody here who's got some knowledge that you'd like to bring to me, because we have a church where we can do programs free of charge in their building. They're not doing anything other than providing a building, but we're eager to involve families and different generations. So yes, we care about it. It's just our next growth opportunity.
Well said. Thank you. Bruce.
And how do you see the new the governor's executive order playing a role in what you're trying to do in terms of the climate change and complying with the Paris Agreement?
Yeah, it's really interesting to see. I guess the short answer is I don't know yet. It's maybe too soon to tell. I have seen that there are obviously cities, entire states around our country that have sent the message back that we are still in. There's obviously strong opposition to dropping out of the Paris Agreement and litigation around that nationally. I know that I do a great deal of work with the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes, and their tribal council has also communicated back, we are still in. And so I think that it's going to take a little while to really understand who in Montana feels that way and has already communicated that information, and then to think about what those opportunities are to move forward. But again, I'd love to hear from some of my partners about their thoughts around that, if you feel like you have a more formed thought than I do. No. You sure? Okay. Yeah. Do you feel like you have something to share about it, Bruce? Because
No, I don't either.
Yeah.
Because it's all fairly new.
Right.
And there was a council appointed, and there are developments there, but a lot of it is how to engage each state agency, of course, in some sort of a climate plan. But it's a very short timeline, being that we're only looking at 2 more years of the current governor.
Yeah.
So what can get accomplished is still up in the air a bit.
Yeah, and I think the challenge there is obviously we've had tremendous amounts of work in the past to address climate change by a lot of the agencies, and so you can see sort of work to do that, and then work going away, and sort of really thinking about what that might look like moving forward under the council, and how they really even understand in a short time frame the incredible work that has been done by so many agencies. I mean, and some of the folks are in the room today already to date. It's incredibly inspiring to me and has been profoundly important. So I think even grappling with the information gathering to understand what's already happened, and then how you might synthesize that and move forward in a different way, is going to take a lot of time and work. Did someone raise their hand? Oh, Val.
This is Valerie Webster again. I think there's also inspired different things going on. I'm on the the Food Security Council with the Montana Food Bank and the Montana Partnership to End Childhood Hunger. So both of those organizations are working very hard on food security, on getting everybody like gardening and becoming aware of their environment and where their food comes from. So not just feeding kids, but trying to go backwards in getting families and people involved in learning. And so there's this natural interaction of the scientists and the specialists in nutrition, and then the faith community, who frankly volunteers for a huge significant portion of all the feeding programs that happen across the state. So everybody's kind of working together, and that makes me think of the 17 sustainability goals at the United Nations, where each thing supports another, so that we can, in that, the goal there is to end poverty all around by caring better for the environment. A lot of the steps include that. So it's the more we collaborate, one thing complements another.
No, that's well said. And I think that's one of the things that can kind of make you feel like your head might blow off your shoulders sometimes, because what we're really talking about is systems change. Systems change is incredibly hard, and it means that you might think that this is the next thing we should do, and then that makes you realize, oh, we have to do 3 other things before we can do that thing, and it's all connected. And so there are huge numbers of opportunities there, but I really think that, I hope that that's where the Governor's Council will go, but I think like everyone else, waiting with bated breath to see where they see the opportunities. Others?
One online that has a question yet. So.
I'd love to hear from you online if you have one, so please don't be shy. Others?
I have one comment to make, and that is that you attributed the IOE with the new effects of climate change on human health. And in fact, it's a partnership with another center here on campus, which I'm going to get wrong if I try to say it. Can you help me, Madison? Sue left.
Sue left. Sue left.
Unfortunately, it's the center she works for. But
That's right.
Okay, thank you. Anyway, it's a partnership with them.
Wonderful.
It was funded by the Montana Healthcare, was a foundation, I guess. So
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you for the correction. It's really important. Other comments or questions?
We'll give another round of applause for Amy.
Thanks, everyone.